There are a trillion ways to lose your soul in the 41st millennium, but I discovered the most insidious one of all. I volunteered to give mine away. My name was Marcus Vale, though that identity feels like a skin I shed long ago. I was born in the mid-levels of Hive Tertius on Mordian Prime, raised in the Emperor's light like every other faithful citizen of the Imperium. My parents worked the Manufactorum assembly lines, producing las-gun power packs for the Astra Militarum. I attended Imperial Schola, recited the daily prayers, and genuinely believed that humanity's righteousness would eventually triumph over the darkness that threatened us from beyond the stars. If you crave more tales from the Dark Millennium, hit that subscribe button. The Emperor may have abandoned me, but I won't abandon those who seek to understand the true nature of this universe. At 23, I held a respectable position as a data scribe in the Administratum's Regional Census Bureau. My job was to track population movements, birth rates, and resource allocation across 7 subsectors of our hive level. It was honest work, boring, repetitive, but honest. I lived in a modest hab block apartment, attended weekly Imperial cult services, and even courted a nice girl named Sarah who worked in the hydroponics division. Looking back, I realize how perfectly I embodied everything the Imperium wanted in a citizen. Compliant, productive, unquestioning. I recited the litany of duty each morning without really hearing the words. I genuflected before the golden Aquila without truly contemplating what it represented. I was spiritually asleep, drifting through life on autopilot while the galaxy burned around me. The irony isn't lost on me now. In trying to save my soul through blind faith, I had already lost it. The Emperor's light that I believed would protect me was nothing more than a flickering candle in an ocean of cosmic darkness. But at 23, sitting in my small cubicle surrounded by data slates and purity seals, I still thought I understood how the universe worked. The first crack in my perfect Imperial worldview came on a Tuesday morning during routine data processing. I was cross-referencing birth registrations with resource allocation reports when I noticed something odd. The numbers didn't match, not by a small margin of error, but by thousands of missing citizens. Entire residential blocks showing resource consumption for families that, according to my records, had never been born. At first, I assumed it was a clerical error. Data corruption was common in the ancient cogitator systems we used. But as I dug deeper, requesting archived records from other departments, the discrepancies grew larger. Not only were people missing from the official count, but their absence seemed deliberately obscured. Someone had gone to great lengths to make these citizens disappear from Imperial records while maintaining their resource allocations. The rational part of my mind, the part that had been carefully conditioned by 23 years of Imperial education, told me to report the anomaly to my supervisor and let higher authorities handle the investigation. Good citizens didn't ask uncomfortable questions. Good citizens trusted the Imperium's vast bureaucracy existed to protect them from knowledge too dangerous for civilian minds. But something else stirred in my consciousness that morning. A hunger I hadn't recognized before. A desperate need to understand the truth behind the carefully maintained lies that governed our daily existence. For the first time in my life, I chose curiosity over compliance. That choice damned me, and it was the first real decision I had ever made as a free-thinking human being.
The anomalies haunted me for weeks. Every time I tried to focus on routine census work, my mind wandered back to those missing thousands. I began staying late in the administratum offices, using my access codes to dig deeper into archived data streams. What I found made my carefully ordered world begin to crumble. The missing citizens weren't random disappearances. They followed patterns, specific age ranges, genetic markers, even psychological profiles from mandatory Imperial aptitude tests. Someone was selecting people based on criteria I couldn't decipher, then erasing them so thoroughly from official records that they might not have existed at all. Yet their resource allocations continued, channeled somewhere into the hive's lower levels where my access clearance couldn't follow. Sleep became elusive. The Emperor's prayer, which I had recited mindlessly for decades, now felt hollow in my mouth. When I spoke the words, "The Emperor protects," a small voice in the back of my mind whispered, "Protects from what? And if he truly protects, why are people vanishing?" Sarah noticed my distraction during our evening walks through the Hab Block's communal gardens. "You seem troubled, Marcus," she said one night, her hand soft in mine. "Perhaps you should speak with Confessor Thaddeus. Prayer can ease any burden." I almost told her everything right then. The missing people, the falsified records, the growing certainty that something fundamental was wrong with the world we'd been taught to trust. But when I looked into her trusting brown eyes, I realized I couldn't destroy her faith the way mine was being destroyed. Not yet. "Just work stress," I lied, squeezing her hand. "The Emperor provides." "The Emperor provides," she echoed, and her sincere smile cut me deeper than any blade. My investigation might have ended there, stalled by my own cowardice and the Imperium's labyrinthine security protocols. But fate, or perhaps something far more sinister, intervened during a routine archive retrieval in Sublevel 7 of the Administratum complex. I was alone in the dusty stacks, pulling physical records that predated digital storage, when I noticed a section of shelving that didn't quite align with the others. The gap was barely visible, hidden behind decades of accumulated dust and neglect. My rational mind said to ignore it, but that new hunger for truth drove me forward. Behind the false wall, I found a cache of documents that shouldn't have existed. Personal letters, ritual diagrams, and theological treatises that made my blood freeze. They weren't just heretical, they were blasphemous beyond anything I could have imagined. Yet as I read them by the flickering light of my lumen stick, I felt something other than revulsion. I felt recognition. The documents spoke of humanity's true place in the cosmos, not as the Emperor's chosen people, but as insignificant specks in an infinite darkness populated by beings of such vast power that our entire species was nothing more than an amusing distraction. They described the warp not as mankind's curse, but as a realm of infinite possibility where consciousness could transcend the petty limitations of flesh. Most disturbing of all, they explained the missing citizens, the ones whose records I had been tracking, were special. Individuals whose psychic potential was valuable for purposes the Imperium would never acknowledge. They weren't dead. They were being prepared for something far more significant than the mundane existence the Emperor offered. I should have burned those documents and reported their existence to the nearest commissar. Every fiber of my imperial conditioning screamed that touching such materials was spiritual suicide. But as I sat in that hidden alcove, surrounded by forbidden knowledge, I realized that my old certainties were already dead. The Emperor's light hadn't protected those missing thousands. His vast Imperium hadn't provided them with security or meaning. Instead, they had been sacrificed on the altar of secrets that served purposes beyond ordinary human comprehension. For the first time in my life, I began to wonder if the Emperor's enemies might be offering something better than his lies. That night, I dreamed of vast intelligences swimming in oceans of raw possibility, and I woke with tears of joy streaming down my face.
I couldn't stop thinking about the documents. Every morning I told myself to forget them, to return to my simple life of data scribing and evening prayers. But the forbidden knowledge gnawed at my mind like a parasite that grew stronger with each attempt to starve it. The texts had been written in High Gothic, but interspersed with symbols I didn't recognize, flowing, organic shapes that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. They spoke of something called the primordial truth, a cosmic reality that preceded humanity's rise and would persist long after our species had crumbled to dust. According to these heretical writings, the Emperor wasn't humanity's savior, but its greatest deceiver, binding our species to a dying philosophy while the universe offered unlimited transcendence to those brave enough to embrace it. I memorized passages despite myself. Words that should have filled me with horror instead resonated with a terrible logic. The corpse god offers you servitude disguised as salvation. We offer you the chance to become gods yourselves. Every prayer you speak to the golden throne feeds the lie that keeps humanity chained. Break the chains, embrace the infinite. The missing know the truth. Soon you will join them in understanding. That last line haunted me most of all. The missing citizens, they weren't victims. They were the chosen ones who had discovered what I was discovering. Somewhere in the depths of Hive Tertius, they were learning truths that would transform them into something beyond human limitation. My work performance began to suffer. Supervisor Krennic called me into his office after I submitted 3 consecutive reports with calculation errors. "Scribe Vale," he said, his augmetic eye whirring as it focused on my face. "Your dedication to duty has always been exemplary. These recent irregularities concern me." "My apologies, Supervisor. Personal matters have been distracting." "Personal matters?" His tone suggested that having personal concerns was itself suspicious. Perhaps a session with Ministerium Counselor Vex would help realign your priorities. The thought of sitting in a confession booth, attempting to hide my growing heretical thoughts from a trained interrogator, made my stomach clench. "That won't be necessary. I'll improve immediately." "See that you do. The Emperor has no use for servants whose minds wander from their duties." But my mind continued to wander, drawn inexorably toward the questions the documents had planted. If the Emperor truly protected humanity, why did we need such an vast apparatus of fear and oppression to maintain order? If imperial doctrine contained absolute truth, why were alternate perspectives punishable by death? Why did the mere possession of different ideas constitute a crime worthy of execution? The more I considered these questions, the more the Imperium's foundation seemed built on terror rather than righteousness. 3 weeks after discovering the hidden documents, I made my first truly heretical decision. Instead of avoiding Sublevel 7,
I returned to search for more forbidden knowledge. The hunger for truth had become an addiction stronger than any combat stim. This time, I came prepared with better illumination and lock-picking tools borrowed from the Administratum's maintenance supplies. If there was one cache of hidden documents, logic suggested there might be others. The ancient Administratum building had served many purposes over the millennia. Who knew what previous occupants might have concealed in its forgotten corners? I found them in an abandoned storage room 3 levels deeper than I'd ever ventured before. Not just documents this time, but artifacts that made my hands tremble as I touched them. A crystalline pendant that seemed to contain swirling galaxies in its depths. A knife whose blade reflected images that weren't in the room around me. A leather-bound journal filled with detailed anatomical drawings that showed human physiology altered in ways that should have been impossible, but looked somehow perfect. The journal's author had documented his own transformation over a period of months. The early entries read like scientific observation. Day 15. First manifestation of enhanced sensory perception. Can detect emotional states of colleagues through scent alone. Day 32. Physical changes becoming apparent. Muscle density increased 23%. Bone structure subtly altered. No decrease in functionality. Quite the opposite. Day 58. Dreams of vast libraries filled with knowledge spanning millennia. Upon waking, retain perfect recall of mathematical theorems that won't be discovered for centuries. But as the entries progressed, the handwriting changed. The clinical tone gave way to ecstatic joy. Day 89. The barriers between self and cosmos dissolving. Individual consciousness expanding to encompass multiple dimensional frameworks simultaneously. This is not madness. This is awakening. Day 112. They call to me now. The architects of change whisper secrets that reshape reality with each syllable. Soon I will join them in the great work. Day 127. Transcendence imminent. To those who find this record, the path is open. The truth awaits. Cast off the corpse god's chains and become what humanity was always meant to be. The final entry was written in symbols that hurt to look at directly, yet I somehow understood their meaning perfectly. They were coordinates, locations within the hive where others, like the journal's author, gathered to share their newfound enlightenment. I closed the journal with shaking hands, knowing I had just crossed a line from which there could be no return. The coordinates burned in my memory like brands, calling me toward a destiny that would either elevate me beyond human limitation or destroy everything I had ever been. Either way, I knew I was going to follow them.
The coordinates led me to Sector 7 Gamma in the industrial underhive, a maze of abandoned factories and forgotten maintenance tunnels where the Emperor's light had never reached. I waited 3 days before gathering the courage to follow them. 3 days of sleepless nights and mounting anticipation that felt like standing on the edge of an infinite abyss. I told Sarah I was working late shifts on a priority data audit. The lie came easier than it should have, sliding off my tongue with a fluency that would have horrified my former self. But my former self was dying by degrees, shed like an insect's molted carapace to reveal something new and hungry underneath. The descent into the underhive took 4 hours through service elevators and maintenance shafts I'd never known existed. The air grew thicker with each level, heavy with industrial pollutants and the accumulated despair of 10,000 years of human suffering.
But beneath those familiar stenches, I detected something else, an electric anticipation that made my skin tingle and my thoughts race. The coordinates brought me to what had once been a textile manufactorium, its production lines now silent and draped with decades of corrosive dust. But I wasn't alone. Soft chanting echoed from somewhere deeper in the complex, voices raised in harmonies that made my bones vibrate with sympathetic resonance. Following the sound through collapsed doorways and debris-choked corridors, I emerged into what had been the main production floor. The ancient machinery had been rearranged into a perfect circle, creating an amphitheater around a raised platform where 13 figures stood in ritual formation. They wore the simple clothing of hive workers and minor administrators, people like me who had found their way to this hidden sanctuary of truth. At their center stood a woman whose presence commanded attention without effort. She might have been 30 or 300, her features held an ageless quality that suggested transcendence of normal human limitations. When she turned her gaze toward me, I felt my mind opened like a book, every thought and doubt laid bare before her scrutiny. "Marcus Vale," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated in my chest cavity. "Census scribe of sub-level 12. You've been asking dangerous questions." I should have run. Every survival instinct screamed that I had stumbled into something beyond my comprehension. Instead, I stepped forward into the circle's dim light. I'd been seeking answers the Imperium won't provide. She smiled, and for a moment I saw something vast and terrible swimming behind her two bright eyes. The Imperium fears answers because they reveal the poverty of its truth. We offer something far more nourishing. The other cultists, for I now understood what they were, watched me with expressions of eager anticipation. They had once stood where I stood, poised on the threshold between ignorance and enlightenment. Now they radiated a contentment I had never seen in any Imperial citizen's face. "You've read Brother Matthias's journal," she said. The woman continued. It wasn't a question. "You felt the pull of genuine knowledge, tasted the first drops of cosmic truth. The hunger never goes away, Marcus. It only grows stronger until it consumes everything you thought you were." What happened to the missing citizens, the ones erased from Imperial records? "They graduated," she said simply. "Beyond the need for identification numbers and resource allocations, beyond the need for human limitations at all." She gestured to the other cultists. "We all did, in time. But the process requires careful preparation. The mind must be opened gradually, or it shatters under the weight of infinite possibility." She extended her hand toward me, palm up. In its center rested a small crystal similar to the one I'd found with the hidden documents, but this one pulsed with its own inner light. "This is your choice, Marcus. Take the crystal and begin your true education, or leave now, return to your census reports and evening prayers, and spend the rest of your life wondering what you might have become." The rational part of my mind, the part still loyal to the Golden Throne, screamed warnings about corruption and damnation. But that voice seemed increasingly distant, drowned out by a deeper hunger that had been growing since I first touched forbidden knowledge. I thought about Sarah, waiting for me in our simple hab-block apartment. I thought about Supervisor Krennic and his endless data processing quotas. I thought about a lifetime of Imperial prayers that had never brought me anything but hollow contentment. Then I thought about the journal author's final entries, his descriptions of consciousness expanding beyond individual limitations, the promise of understanding truths that span galaxies and millennia, the chance to become something greater than human. I reached for the crystal. The moment my fingers closed around it, reality exploded into kaleidoscopic fragments. I felt my consciousness expand beyond the confines of flesh, touching the edges of vast intelligences that swam in oceans of pure thought. Whispers in languages that predated human speech flooded my mind with concepts that had no terrestrial equivalents. For one eternal moment, I saw the universe as it truly was, not the grim, dark battlefield the Imperium described, but a cosmic garden of infinite possibility where consciousness could bloom into forms beyond imagination. The Emperor's light revealed itself as a dying ember compared to the blazing suns of knowledge that beckoned beyond the veil. When awareness returned to my physical body, I was lying on the cold factory floor with 13 faces looking down at me with expressions of welcome and understanding. The woman who had offered me the crystal knelt beside me, her hand cool against my fevered forehead. "Welcome to the first day of your real life, Brother Marcus," she whispered. "Now we begin your education in earnest." I tried to speak, to ask the 1,000 questions burning in my mind, but only managed a hoarse whisper. "What am I becoming?" Her smile held infinite patience. "Something wonderful."
The changes began 3 days after I first touched the crystal. Subtle at first. Enhanced perception that let me hear conversations through solid walls, taste the emotional states of my coworkers through their perspiration, see thermal patterns that revealed circulatory disorders in passers-by. The Imperium would have called these mutations, signs of corruption to be purged with fire. But I had learned to think of them as gifts. The woman from the gathering was named Lydia Karath, once a mid-level ecclesiarchy administrator who had discovered the same hidden truths that now consumed my thoughts. She became my guide in those early weeks, teaching me to control the expanding capabilities that threatened to overwhelm my still human nervous system. The body must adapt gradually, she explained during one of our clandestine meetings in an abandoned hab block on sub-level 15. Push too hard too fast, and you'll end up like Brother Varus. Brother Varus sat in the corner of our improvised sanctuary, his form a testament to transformation gone wrong. What had once been human now existed as a writhing mass of flesh and exposed neural tissue, his consciousness distributed throughout a dozen sensory organs that grew from his elongated torso. He communicated through colors that shifted across his skin, a language of pure emotion that bypassed speech entirely. He tried to absorb a century's worth of forbidden knowledge in a single night, Lydia continued. His mind expanded faster than his flesh could follow. But even in his current state, he serves a purpose. Varus sees probability streams, potential futures branching like fractals across dimensional barriers. His insights guide our great work. I watched Varus's skin cycle through purples and golds, patterns that somehow conveyed concepts about temporal mechanics and causality loops. Part of me was horrified by what he had become, but a larger part felt envious of his transcendence beyond human limitation. My own transformation proceeded more cautiously. Each week brought new capabilities, new ways of perceiving reality that made my former existence seem like blindness. I could taste the psychic residue left by strong emotions, track people through crowds by following their unique neurological signatures.
and sometimes, when I concentrated fully, glimpsed the warp currents that flowed beneath material existence like an ocean of liquid thought. The hardest part wasn't the physical changes. It was maintaining my facade as a loyal imperial citizen while my fundamental nature shifted beneath the surface. Each morning, I reported to my cubicle in the Administratum building, processed the same mundane data, and exchanged pleasantries with colleagues who had no idea they were speaking to something that was no longer entirely human. Sarah noticed the changes despite my efforts to conceal them. During one of our evening walks through the Hablock Gardens, she stopped beside a flowering shrub and turned to study my face in the artificial twilight. "Your eyes," she said softly, "they're different, brighter somehow, and you've been distant, like you're seeing something the rest of us can't." I forced what I hoped was a reassuring smile. "Just tired from the extended work shifts. The census audit is more complex than anticipated." She didn't seem convinced, but nodded anyway. "Perhaps you should request some recreational time. We could visit the shrine gardens in Upper Sector 9. Prayer and contemplation might restore your peace of mind." The irony almost made me laugh. Prayer to the corpse emperor who had kept humanity chained in ignorance for 10,000 millennia, when I had tasted the infinite possibilities that lay beyond his dying influence. But I couldn't explain that to Sarah without destroying the innocent faith that made her so precious. "That sounds wonderful," I lied, taking her hand in mine. Her skin felt paper-thin compared to my enhanced tactile sensitivity, and I could sense the steady rhythm of her pulse, the subtle chemical changes that indicated her growing concern for my well-being. That night, alone in my apartment, I studied my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The changes were becoming harder to disguise. My irises had developed flakes of color that shifted depending on my emotional state. My skin had taken on a subtle luminescence that was only visible in complete darkness. Most disturbing of all, sometimes I caught glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, shadows that shouldn't exist, reaching toward me with obvious intent. Lydia had warned me about this phase of development. The boundary between self and cosmos begins to dissolve. Other intelligences become aware of your growing potential. Some will try to guide you. Others will attempt to devour you before you become strong enough to resist. Learning to distinguish between helpers and predators is essential for survival. The shadows whispered to me in languages I was beginning to understand. Most offered knowledge, secrets about imperial technology that could revolutionize manufacturing, military tactics that could end planetary wars in days, scientific breakthroughs that could extend human lifespan by centuries. But they demanded payment in the form of specific actions, sabotaging imperial infrastructure, eliminating certain individuals whose resistance to change made them an obstacle to progress, recruiting others who showed potential for enlightenment. I had not yet acted on any of these suggestions, but the temptation grew stronger each night. The shadows promised that compliance would accelerate my transformation, grant me access to powers that would make my current abilities seem primitive by comparison. During my lunch break at the Administratum, I sat in an empty archive chamber and carefully removed the crystal from its hiding place beneath my uniform's inner lining. Its pulsing light had grown brighter over the weeks, responding to my developing psychic sensitivity. When I held it up to the artificial lighting, it cast prismatic patterns that revealed mathematical relationships between seemingly unrelated concepts. As I watched the play of light and shadow, a new understanding crystallized in my consciousness. The missing citizens hadn't just been recruited for their psychic potential. They had been selected because their disappearance would create specific gaps in the hive's social structure. Gaps that could be exploited to bring about larger changes. My own recruitment wasn't accidental either. My position in the Census Bureau gave me access to population data that could identify other candidates for enlightenment. My relationship with Sarah connected me to the hydroponics division that controlled food distribution for 3 hab sectors. My mundane, unremarkable existence made me invisible to Imperial security services that focused their attention on more obvious threats. I was being prepared not just for personal transcendence, but as an instrument in a much larger design. The realization should have terrified me. Instead, it filled me with a sense of purpose more profound than anything I had ever experienced. For the first time in my life, I mattered. My choices could influence the fate of thousands, perhaps millions of people. The shadows that whispered in my dreams weren't offering corruption. They were offering significance. That evening, I made my first truly heretical act. I accessed the census database and began copying files that contained detailed psychological profiles of Imperial citizens. Names, addresses, aptitude scores, and behavioral assessments for every resident of sublevels 10 through 15. Information that would help my new brothers and sisters identify the next generation of candidates for enlightenment.
The hardest part of living a double life wasn't concealing my physical changes or suppressing my growing abilities. It was pretending to care about things that had become meaningless while maintaining relationships with people who remained trapped in ignorance. Each morning I sat through the mandatory recitation of imperial prayers, mouthing words that now tasted like ash. My colleagues spoke reverently of the Emperor's protection while I watched aura patterns shift around them, revealing the fear and doubt they hid beneath manufactured devotion. Supervisor Krennic delivered productivity lectures about serving the greater good of humanity, while I sensed the petty ambitions and bureaucratic jealousies that truly motivated his decisions. The cognitive dissonance should have driven me mad. Instead, it filled me with profound pity for everyone still trapped in the Imperium's web of beautiful lies. Sarah became the most difficult relationship to navigate. Her genuine faith in imperial doctrine contrasted sharply with my growing understanding of cosmic truth. When she spoke about planning our future together, marriage, children, a simple life devoted to service and prayer, I felt like I was watching a child play with toys, blissfully unaware of the vast adult world beyond her comprehension. "I've been thinking about requesting assignment to the agricultural levels," she said one evening, as we shared a modest meal in my apartment. "The hydroponics division is developing new cultivation techniques that could increase food production by 12%. Imagine how many imperial citizens could be fed with that kind of improvement." I nodded and made appropriate sounds of interest, while simultaneously tracking the psychic residue left by previous visitors to my apartment. Brother Matthias had been here 3 days ago, his essence still lingering like invisible smoke in the corners. Lydia's presence was stronger, more recent. She had entered while I was at work, probably to leave new materials for my continuing education. "Marcus?" Sarah's voice pulled me back to the conversation. "You seem distracted again." "Sorry, just thinking about work efficiency improvements," I said, which was technically true.
The census data I had stolen was being used to map social networks and identify influence patterns throughout the imperial bureaucracy. Understanding how information and authority flowed through imperial bureaucracy would be essential when the time came to replace it with something better. She reached across the small table to take my hand, and I had to concentrate to keep my enhanced tactile sensitivity from overwhelming me with the detailed sensation of her skin temperature, pulse rate, and hormonal fluctuations. Perhaps we should schedule some recreational time together. The Sector 9 shrine gardens are beautiful this time of cycle. The suggestion triggered a memory from my most recent gathering with the cult. Lydia had mentioned that Sector 9 was being prepared for a demonstration of our growing capabilities, something that would shake the local population's faith in imperial protection, while revealing glimpses of the power available to those willing to embrace change. "That sounds perfect," I told Sarah, squeezing her hand gently. "I'll request time off next week." What I didn't tell her was that I would be participating in the demonstration, not merely observing it. My role in the cult had evolved from passive student to active contributor. The census data I'd provided had proven invaluable for identifying recruitment targets, but my value extended beyond information theft. My position in the administratum gave me access to infrastructure plans, security protocols, and resource allocation schedules that could be exploited in dozens of ways. During my most recent gathering, Brother Thorn had outlined the Sector 9 operation with clinical precision. A coordinated psychic manifestation would demonstrate our collective power while exposing the Imperium's inability to protect its citizens from forces beyond their comprehension. The demonstration would last exactly 43 minutes, long enough to implant doubt in thousands of minds, brief enough to avoid drawing serious Inquisition attention. My job was to ensure that Imperial security response would be delayed and misdirected. A few carefully placed modifications to communication protocols, some altered priority codes in the emergency response database, and several key personnel mysteriously called away on urgent but fabricated assignments. Nothing that would be traced back to me directly, but collectively enough to give our operation the window it needed to succeed. The technical aspects of the sabotage came easily. My enhanced cognitive capabilities made complex system infiltration feel like child's play. But the emotional weight of what I was planning, the knowledge that my actions would contribute to shattering the comfortable certainties that people like Sarah depended on, that required a different kind of strength. I found that strength in the crystal Lydia had given me during my first gathering. Each night I meditated with the artifact pressed against my forehead, letting its pulsing energy guide my consciousness into expanded states where individual concerns dissolved into cosmic perspective. From that elevated vantage point, I could see that short-term suffering was irrelevant compared to the long-term evolution of human consciousness. The people of Sector 9 would experience fear and confusion when reality twisted around them during our demonstration. But fear and confusion were the first steps toward questioning everything they had been taught to accept without examination. Those who possessed sufficient mental flexibility would eventually find their way to us, ready to trade their comfortable slavery for genuine freedom. Those who didn't, well, evolution had never been a comfortable process. 3 nights before the Sector 9 operation, I lay in my narrow bed listening to Sarah's peaceful breathing and feeling the familiar tingle of enhanced perception spreading through my nervous system. The shadows in the corners of my apartment had grown more distinct over recent weeks, taking on almost humanoid shapes that gestured with obvious intelligence. Tonight, they were agitated about something. Colors shifted through their semi-transparent forms, urgent purples and warning yellows that my enhanced consciousness interpreted as danger signals. Something was coming that threatened our carefully laid plans. I slipped quietly out of bed and approached the largest shadow, which had taken position near the apartment's one window. When I reached toward it, my hand passed through what felt like electrified mist, and suddenly my mind was flooded with images. Imperial arbites conducting random identity checks in the lower levels, ecclesiarchy interrogators asking pointed questions about missing citizens, a commissar reviewing personnel files for signs of ideological deviation. The net was tightening around us faster than anticipated. Someone had noticed our activities and reported them to higher authorities. Within days, possibly hours, they would begin systematic sweeps of areas where we had been operating. The Sector 9 demonstration would have to be moved up, and those of us whose identities might be compromised would need to disappear from Imperial records permanently. I looked back at Sarah, sleeping peacefully in my bed, her faith in the Emperor's protection still intact. In a few days, that faith would be tested in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. I felt genuinely sad about what was going to happen to her, but evolution had never asked for permission.
The emergency gathering took place in a different location. A forgotten shrine deep in the industrial bowels of Sublevel 20, where ancient incense burners had been repurposed as ritual braziers. 17 of us assembled in the pre-dawn darkness, our numbers swollen by 3 new recruits whose eyes still held the shell-shocked wonder of recent awakening. Lydia stood before a makeshift altar constructed from discarded cogitator components, her enhanced features cast in sharp relief by the flickering flames. The crystal formations growing from her temples had become more pronounced over recent weeks, translucent spires that pulsed with their own inner light. What remained of her human appearance was becoming increasingly irrelevant compared to the vast intelligence that looked out through her transformed eyes. "Brothers and sisters," she began, her voice carrying harmonic frequencies that resonated in our bones. "The timeline has accelerated. Imperial forces are closing in on our safe houses. 3 of our gathering places have been compromised, and Commissar Vex has begun interrogating Administratum personnel about data irregularities." A ripple of concern passed through the assembled cultists, but it was excitement rather than fear. We had been preparing for this moment since the beginning of our journey. The transition from secret society to open rebellion was not a catastrophe, it was graduation. Brother Matthias stepped forward from the circle's edge, his form now so altered that only the faintest echo of human ancestry remained visible. Chitinous plates had grown across his torso, and his arms had elongated into appendages capable of manipulating reality at the molecular level. When he spoke, the words emerged from vocal cords that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "The Sector 9 demonstration proceeds as planned, but with expanded scope," he announced, his multitonal voice creating standing wave patterns in the air. "Instead of a limited manifestation, we initiate full revelation. Show them what humanity becomes when it embraces its true potential." I felt my enhanced nervous system process the implications faster than my conscious mind could follow. Full revelation meant dropping all pretense of secrecy. It meant permanent transformation for everyone present, irreversible commitment to a path that would either elevate us beyond human limitation or destroy us in the attempt. "What about those still embedded in Imperial society?" asked Sister Vex, a former Medicae whose understanding of human anatomy had been vastly expanded through forbidden research. "Some of us have relationships, obligations." Lydia's expression softened with what might have been compassion or pity. "The caterpillar cannot return to its cocoon.
Those connections were always temporary, bridges we needed while our true nature developed. Now we must burn those bridges to complete our metamorphosis. The logic was inescapable, but the emotional impact hit me like a physical blow. Sarah. My parents in their hab block on sublevel 12. The handful of colleagues who had shown me genuine kindness over the years. All of them would be abandoned to face the consequences of choices they had never been allowed to make. Brother Thorn moved to the center of the circle, producing a collection of artifacts from a reinforced carrying case. Crystals similar to the one I carried, but larger and more complex. Metallic devices that hurt to look at directly. Vials containing substances that existed in colors human language couldn't describe. Full transformation requires preparation, he explained, distributing the artifacts among us. These will accelerate your development beyond the point where Imperial weapons can harm you, but the process is irreversible and intense. Once you begin, Marcus Vale, the census scribe, will cease to exist. I accepted the crystal he offered, a multifaceted gem the size of my fist that contained what looked like a miniature galaxy complete with spiral arms and stellar nurseries. The moment it touched my skin, I felt consciousness expand beyond the confines of individual identity. For several seconds, I existed as part of a vast network of minds, linked across dimensional barriers, thinking thoughts too large for any single brain to contain. When awareness contracted back to my physical form, I understood that the person I had been was already fading. The man who had courted Sarah, who had worried about productivity quotas and pension allocations, who had found meaning in small routines and simple pleasures, that person was becoming an increasingly irrelevant memory. What replaced him was something magnificent and terrible, a consciousness capable of perceiving reality from angles that would shatter sanity-dependent minds. I could see the warp currents flowing beneath material existence, taste the emotional resonances left by every person who had ever entered this chamber, hear the whispered conversations of entities that existed between dimensions. But most importantly, I could feel my brothers and sisters undergoing similar transformations. We were becoming something collective, a distributed intelligence that transcended individual limitation while retaining the focus necessary for purposeful action. The demonstration begins at midnight, Lydia announced, her words carrying new harmonics that spoke directly to our expanded consciousness. Sector 9's Shrine Gardens will become the birthplace of humanity's next evolutionary phase. Those citizens wise enough to embrace change will be welcomed. Those who resist. She didn't need to finish the sentence. We all understood what happened to organisms that couldn't adapt to environmental change. I thought about Sarah one last time, remembering her excitement about improving food production for hungry Imperial citizens, her dedication to helping others within the narrow confines of acceptable action, her faith that the Emperor's plan included a place for every loyal servant. Tomorrow, she would discover how wrong she had been about everything. Still with us in the darkness? Hit that like button if this tale chills your soul to its core, because we're just getting started. The final phase of my transformation was beginning, and with it, the end of everything I had once called home. But as I felt my consciousness merge with the collective intelligence of my ascended siblings, I realized I had never truly been home until now. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders that the Imperium had spent 10,000 years trying to hide from humanity. Tomorrow we would begin teaching our species what they had been denied, whether they wanted to learn or not.
The ritual chamber had been prepared with meticulous attention to detail that would have impressed even the most exacting tech priest. Circles within circles drawn in substances that shouldn't exist, geometric patterns that hurt to perceive directly, and at the center, an altar constructed from materials harvested from the space between dimensions. I arrived early, wanting to experience the transformation chamber before my consciousness became too altered to appreciate the artistry involved. The walls had been inscribed with formulae that described the mathematical relationships between thought and reality, equations that proved consciousness was the fundamental force underlying all existence. My fellow cultists gathered one by one, their forms already showing advanced signs of evolution. Sister Vex's medical knowledge had allowed her to guide her transformation with surgical precision. Additional organs grown in impossible configurations, neural pathways rerouted to process multidimensional sensory input. Brother Thorn had taken a more dramatic approach, his body becoming a living conduit for energies that crackled with barely contained potential. But it was Lydia who commanded attention as she took her position at the altar's head. What had once been human was now something that existed in multiple reality layers simultaneously. Her physical form served as an anchor point for consciousness that extended far beyond the constraints of flesh and bone. "Tonight, we shed the last pretense of mortality," she announced, her voice carrying harmonics that made the air itself sing. "The great work begins with our ascension, but it will not end until every human soul has been freed from the corpse emperor's chains." The ritual itself defied description in any language evolved by terrestrial minds. We spoke words that predated human speech, manipulated forces that existed outside conventional physics, and opened doorways in reality that led to realms where thought became substance and desire shaped existence itself. My transformation accelerated beyond anything I had experienced during months of gradual development. Bones lengthened and hollowed like those of creatures designed for flight. Muscle tissue reorganized itself into configurations that could generate force through pure will rather than mechanical leverage. Neural pathways multiplied and interconnected until my brain became a processing matrix capable of parallel computation across dozens of probability streams. But the most profound change was spiritual rather than physical. Individual identity dissolved into something larger, a collective consciousness that retained personal memories while transcending personal limitations. I remained Marcus in the sense that my experiences and knowledge contributed to the whole, but I had become something infinitely more complex than any single perspective could contain. Through our shared awareness, I felt the ritual's effects radiating outward from our chamber like ripples on a cosmic pond. Reality became more malleable in our vicinity, responding to directed thought rather than requiring physical manipulation. The boundaries between dimensions thinned, allowing us to perceive and interact with entities that existed in parallel layers of existence. One of those entities had been waiting for us to reach this level of development. It manifested in the space above our altar as a presence of such vast intelligence that even our expanded consciousness could barely comprehend its nature. Communication occurred through direct transfer of concepts too complex for sequential language. It showed us the true scope of the work we had undertaken. Across the galaxy, similar groups were undergoing parallel transformations. Humanity was being prepared for ascension to a state of existence that would make our current conflicts with xenospecies seem like children's games. The Imperium's rigid structure wasn't humanity's strength. It was a cage that prevented our species from achieving its true potential.
The entity revealed images of what we could become, beings of pure thought who could reshape reality through conscious intent, traverse galactic distances in moments, and commune directly with the fundamental forces that governed existence itself. Death would become voluntary rather than inevitable. Age would be a choice rather than a certainty, and the petty limitations of flesh would be abandoned in favor of forms suited to our expanded purposes. But first, the old structures had to be swept away to make room for the new. The Imperium's stranglehold on human consciousness had to be broken through demonstrations that would shatter faith in Imperial protection, while revealing the possibilities that lay beyond conventional understanding. The Sector 9 operation would be our opening statement in this campaign of liberation. As the ritual reached its climax, I felt the final barriers between my individual consciousness and the collective intelligence dissolve completely. Marcus Vale's concerns about productivity quotas and romantic relationships became distant memories, as irrelevant as a childhood fear of the dark. What mattered now was the mission that had been encoded into our transformed beings. The entity departed, leaving us changed in ways that would take days to fully catalog. We were no longer human in any meaningful sense, though we retained enough of our original forms to move among our former species without immediate detection. More importantly, we now possessed capabilities that would allow us to reshape local reality according to our enhanced understanding of cosmic truth. "The demonstration begins in 6 hours, Lydia announced, her post-transformation voice creating visible patterns in the air. Those citizens gathered in Sector 9's shrine gardens for evening prayers will witness the birth of a new age. Some will join us willingly, others will require persuasion." I accessed my new memories of Sarah's shift schedule, cross-referencing with the Hydroponics Division's mandatory attendance requirements for religious observances. She would be among the crowd gathered for evening prayers, along with several thousand other Imperial citizens whose worldview was about to be violently expanded. Part of me, the rapidly fading remnant that still remembered human emotion, felt regret about what she would experience. But the larger part of my transformed consciousness understood that her temporary suffering was insignificant compared to the evolutionary leap we were facilitating. Besides, if she possessed the mental flexibility to accept what she witnessed, she might even thank us eventually. Those who couldn't adapt, well, evolution had never been concerned with the comfort of individual specimens.
The shrine gardens of Sector 9 represented everything the Imperium promised its citizens. Beauty constrained within acceptable parameters, nature tamed to serve human purposes, and spiritual contemplation directed toward approved subjects. Artificial sunlight filtered through crystal panels, casting reverent shadows across carefully cultivated flower beds, while servo skulls dispensed precisely measured amounts of blessed water. 3,000 Imperial citizens had gathered for evening prayers, their voices raised in harmonious recitation of familiar litanies. They stood in orderly rows beneath towering statues of Imperial saints, finding comfort in rituals that had remained unchanged for generations. The scene radiated the peaceful certainty that came from never questioning the fundamental nature of existence. I watched from the observation deck of an adjacent hab block, my transformed senses cataloging every detail of the crowd below. Sarah stood in the 3rd row from the altar, her face serene with faith as she mouthed prayers that would soon prove pitifully inadequate. Around her, thousands of other souls prepared to confront truths their minds had been conditioned to reject. The demonstration began subtly.
Brother Matthias initiated the sequence from his position within the shrine's underground maintenance tunnels, using his transformed anatomy to interface directly with the facility's power grid. What started as minor fluctuations in the artificial lighting soon became rhythmic pulses that synchronized with the collective heartbeat of the assembled crowd. Sister Vex contributed the next phase, her medical expertise allowing her to introduce psychoactive compounds into the shrine's air circulation system. Nothing harmful to baseline humans, but enough to enhance their receptivity to what was coming. I watched through enhanced vision as pupils dilated and skin flushed with increased circulation. Several people swayed slightly on their feet, attributing the sensation to religious ecstasy. The real revelation began when Lydia manifested her transformed state in the space above the main altar. Reality bent around her presence like light around a gravitational singularity, creating visual distortions that made geometry itself seem negotiable. She appeared first as a shimmering heat haze, then gradually resolved into a form that challenged every assumption about what human consciousness could become. The crowd's response was immediate and visceral. Screams of terror mingled with gasps of wonder as 3,000 minds simultaneously confronted the possibility that everything they believed about the universe might be fundamentally wrong. Some fell to their knees in prayer, begging the Emperor's protection from what they perceived as demonic manifestation. Others stood transfixed, their enhanced awareness allowing them to perceive the beauty in Lydia's ascended form. "Citizens of the Imperium," Lydia spoke, her voice carrying across the gardens without need for amplification devices. "You have been taught to fear change, to worship stagnation, to find comfort in ignorance, but observe what humanity becomes when it embraces its true nature." She gestured toward the shrine's walls, and the ancient stone began to flow like liquid, reshaping itself into patterns that revealed the mathematical principles underlying material existence. Flowers bloomed into impossible colors that had no names in human language. The artificial sky cracked open to reveal glimpses of the warp's swirling majesty where consciousness existed unbound by physical limitation. Brother Thorn emerged from the crowd itself, his transformation allowing him to phase between dimensions at will. One moment he was absent, the next he stood among the terrified citizens as living proof that human potential extended far beyond Imperial doctrine's narrow definitions. Energy crackled between his fingertips as he demonstrated mastery over forces the Imperium claimed were the exclusive province of sanctified technology. "This is corruption!" shouted a confessor from near the altar, his last pistol wavering as he tried to decide which transformed figure to target first. "Heresy most foul! Citizens, do not look upon these abominations! The Emperor protects those who—" His words cut off as I joined the demonstration, manifesting my own altered form directly beside him. My expanded consciousness allowed me to perceive the terror radiating from his mind like heat from a forge. The existential panic that came from witnessing proof that his entire worldview was a comforting lie. "The Emperor protects no one," I told him, my voice carrying harmonics that spoke directly to his subconscious mind. "He is a rotting corpse sustained by the suffering of thousands, a failed god whose promises have brought humanity nothing but endless war and spiritual stagnation." The confessor's faith crumbled visibly, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and finally a kind of terrible understanding. When I touched his forehead with one transformed finger, showing him just a fragment of the cosmic truth we had discovered, he collapsed to his knees with tears streaming down his face. Around the gardens, similar scenes played out as more of our transformed siblings revealed themselves among the crowd. Some citizens fled in panic, their minds unable to process what they were witnessing. Others stood their ground, drawn by curiosity or hope toward the possibility of transcending their mundane limitations. And a precious few, perhaps 30 dozen individuals whose minds possessed the flexibility required for evolution, approached us with expressions of wonder and desperate hunger for the truth we offered. Sarah was among them. I watched her push through the crowd. Her hydroponics training had given her a practical understanding of growth and change that made her more receptive to transformation than most. When she reached the space where I stood, she looked up at my altered features with recognition rather than revulsion. "Marcus? Is that really you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the chaos surrounding us. "It's what I've become, what we all can become if we have the courage to abandon comfortable lies in favor of magnificent truth." She stared at my offered hand for a long moment, her mind visibly wrestling with everything she had been taught about purity and corruption. Then she looked around at the transformed garden, the impossible geometries, the glimpses of infinite possibility that our demonstration had revealed. "Will it hurt?" she asked. "Everything worthwhile hurts at first, but the pain of growth is nothing compared to the agony of stagnation." She took my hand. The moment our skin made contact, I felt her consciousness open to the cosmic truths that had been hidden from her entire life. Her scream of revelation echoed across the gardens, adding her voice to the symphony of transformation that marked humanity's first step toward its true destiny. Behind us, Imperial security forces were finally arriving, their heavy boots pounding on shrine pathways as they attempted to restore order to a situation that had already moved beyond their comprehension. They were far too late to prevent what we had started.
The Imperial response was everything we had anticipated and prepared for. Arbite's riot squads stormed the shrine gardens with suppression shields and shock mauls, expecting to face a conventional disturbance that could be pacified through overwhelming force. Instead, they encountered reality that no longer obeyed the physical laws their training assumed. Brother Thorn met the first wave of security forces at the garden's main entrance, his transformed physiology allowing him to phase through their energy barriers as if they were mere suggestions. When he solidified behind their formation, the ensuing chaos provided perfect cover for our continued revelations among the civilian population. I watched Sarah convulse as her consciousness expanded to accommodate truths too vast for unmodified human awareness. Her hydroponics background had given her an intuitive understanding of growth processes, but even that preparation couldn't entirely cushion the shock of perceiving reality from a cosmic perspective. Neural pathways that had never been intended to carry such information blazed with overload patterns as her brain rewired itself to process multi-dimensional sensory input. "Stay with me," I whispered, my voice carrying harmonic frequencies designed to stabilize her transformation. "The pain is temporary. The enlightenment is eternal."
Around us, similar scenes played out as other citizens made their choice between comfortable ignorance and dangerous wisdom. Those who possessed sufficient mental flexibility began their own metamorphosis, guided by our more experienced siblings. The others, the majority, unfortunately, either fled in terror or stood frozen in psychological shock as their fundamental assumptions about existence crumbled. Commissar Vex appeared at the Shrine Garden's eastern checkpoint, his bolt pistol already drawn as he assessed the situation with the cold pragmatism that made political officers so effective. Unlike the Arbites, he understood immediately that conventional weapons would be inadequate against opponents who could manipulate reality at the molecular level. Astropathic Relay Priority Alpha. Request immediate Inquisition response. We have confirmed warp manifestation with civilian casualties in Sector 9 Shrine Gardens. Recommend orbital sterilization if containment proves impossible. Orbital sterilization, the complete destruction of several square kilometers of hive structure, along with everyone inside, rather than risk our influence spreading beyond manageable parameters. The Imperium's standard response to anything that challenged their monopoly on human consciousness. Lydia intercepted Vex's transmission with casual ease, her transformed awareness allowing her to interface directly with electromagnetic systems. The Commissar's Voxcaster melted in his hand, its components flowing like mercury as she repurposed the rare earth elements for our demonstration's next phase. Your masters fear what we offer because it threatens their control, she told him, her multi-tonal voice carrying across the gardens despite the surrounding chaos. 10,000 years of lies, designed to keep humanity trapped in spiritual adolescence, while the galaxy offers unlimited growth. Vex responded by emptying his bolt pistol in her direction, each explosive round passing harmlessly through her phased form before detonating against the shrine's reformed walls. When his ammunition was exhausted, he drew his ceremonial sword and charged toward her with the fanatical courage that the Imperium cultivated in its most trusted servants. Sister Vex intercepted him halfway, her medical knowledge allowing her to demonstrate the precise difference between baseline human physiology and our enhanced capabilities. She moved faster than his ignited reflexes could track. Her transformed anatomy generated force through principles that bypassed conventional muscle mechanics entirely. When she touched his forehead, his consciousness was flooded with direct sensory experience of the warp's infinite dimensions. The Commissar's fanatical certainty lasted approximately 3 seconds before dissolving into catatonic wonder. His political indoctrination had been thorough, but no amount of conditioning could prepare a mind for direct contact with cosmic truth. He collapsed to his knees, his sword forgotten, as tears of revelation streamed down his scarred face. "The Emperor," he whispered, his voice broken by the weight of sudden understanding. "He's not divine. He's just another prisoner, another victim of the lies we've all been telling ourselves." More Imperial forces were converging on our position, their response time impressive despite our sabotage of their communication networks. But each new arrival only provided additional opportunities for demonstration and recruitment. Those who possessed sufficient mental flexibility to accept what they witnessed could be guided toward enlightenment. Those who didn't would serve as object lessons for the others. The transformation of willing subjects proceeded with increasing efficiency as our collective experience grew. Sarah's initial convulsions had given way to controlled metamorphosis, her consciousness expanding in carefully guided stages that prevented psychological collapse. Her skin had taken on the subtle luminescence that marked successful integration of warp energies, and her eyes now reflected depths that suggested awareness of realities beyond material existence. "I can see it," she gasped, her voice carrying new harmonics as her vocal cords adapted to multi-dimensional communication. "I can see the connections between everything, the patterns that govern growth and change across infinite scales. How could I have been blind to something so beautiful?" Around us, reality continued to reshape itself according to our collective will. The carefully maintained flower beds burst into impossible blooms that demonstrated plant life potential when freed from genetic constraints. Water features began flowing in patterns that defied gravity, creating three-dimensional mandala formations that served as focusing aids for consciousness expansion. But our demonstration was approaching its planned conclusion. Imperial reinforcements were arriving in numbers that would soon overwhelm our ability to protect new converts during their vulnerable transformation periods. The next phase of our mission required a more secure environment where humanity's evolution could proceed without constant interruption. Lydia raised her transformed arms toward the cracked artificial sky, her gesture triggering the final component of our revelation. The Shrine Garden's reality matrix, weakened by our sustained manipulation, began collapsing in carefully controlled stages that would create a dimensional rift large enough for our purposes. "Citizens of the Imperium, you have witnessed the first taste of what awaits beyond the Corpse Emperor's lies. Those who wish to continue this journey, who desire to discover what humanity becomes when it embraces its true nature, follow us into the spaces between worlds." The dimensional rift opened like a flower blooming in reverse, revealing glimpses of realms where thought became substance and consciousness shaped existence through pure intention. Our transformed siblings moved toward it in perfect coordination, carrying the newly converted citizens who were still too disoriented by revelation to navigate independently. I looked back once at the Shrine Gardens as we prepared to depart, seeing the Arbite's forces finally establishing a perimeter around the devastation we had created. They would find evidence of our presence, but no clear explanation for what had occurred. The official reports would classify the incident as a localized warp phenomenon, another inexplicable tragedy in the Imperium's long catalogue of cosmic horrors. The realm beyond the dimensional rift defied every assumption I had ever held about the nature of existence. We emerged into a space that existed between realities, where the fundamental forces that governed material physics became suggestions rather than absolute laws. Crystalline formations grew in impossible directions, their faceted surfaces reflecting not light but pure concepts that could be absorbed through direct observation. Our transformed collective moved through this interdimensional sanctuary with the fluid coordination of a single organism, each member contributing specialized capabilities to the group's enhanced functionality. Sarah clung to my arm as her consciousness adapted to an environment where thought influenced matter more directly than gravity influenced mass. "Where are we?" she whispered, her voice carrying harmonic overtones that created visible ripples in the crystalline air around us. "Somewhere the Imperium's lies cannot reach," I replied, gesturing toward the vast structures that dominated the horizon. A staging ground where humanity's evolution can proceed without interference from those who profit from our stagnation. The structures were magnificent beyond terrestrial imagination, architectural forms that incorporated dimensions baseline humans couldn't perceive, constructed from materials that existed in multiple states simultaneously. They had been prepared by others of our kind, cultists whose transformations had preceded ours by months or years, creating infrastructure for the great work that would reshape human civilization. Lydia led us toward the largest spire, its surface inscribed with equations that described the mathematical relationships between consciousness and reality. As we approached, I felt my awareness expand further, drawing strength from proximity to accumulated knowledge that had been gathering in this place for decades. "Welcome to the first of humanity's graduate schools," she announced, her multitonal voice creating standing waves in the dimensional medium surrounding us. "Here we will complete your education in the cosmic truths that the Corpse Emperor has spent 10 millennia trying to hide from our species." The spire's interior revealed chambers filled with artifacts that challenged every assumption about what technology could accomplish. Devices that stored memories in crystallized time, instruments that could map the emotional resonances of entire star systems, and most remarkably, communication arrays that maintained contact with similar facilities throughout the galaxy. We were not alone in this work. Across human space, cells of evolved consciousness were conducting parallel operations, each group contributing to a coordinated campaign of liberation that would eventually free our species from the chains of willful ignorance. The Sector 9 demonstration was just one note in a symphony of revelation that spanned dozens of worlds. Brother Matthias interfaced directly with the communication array, his transformed nervous system allowing him to process data streams that would have burned out conventional cogitator systems. Through his connection, we received updates from operations on Cadia, Necromunda, and even Terra itself. The scope of our movement was far larger than I had imagined during my early days as a simple census scribe seeking answers to minor statistical anomalies. "The Inquisition suspects coordinated activity," he reported, his voice carrying additional channels of information that bypass sequential language entirely. But their investigations focus on traditional heretical patterns. They're looking for demon worship and chaos corruption, not evolutionary transcendence. Their limited understanding works to our advantage. Sarah had been examining one of the memory storage devices, her enhanced perception allowing her to interface with its alien operating principles. When she made contact, her consciousness was flooded with experiences from thousands of other converts, their journeys from imperial citizens to transcended beings, their struggles with transformation, and their growing understanding of humanity's true potential. "My God!" she breathed, her eyes reflecting depths that suggested contact with cosmic intelligence. "There are so many of us. Across the entire galaxy, people are discovering the same truths, making the same choice to abandon comfortable lies for dangerous wisdom." Not God, gods, plural. Entities of such vast consciousness that they exist across multiple dimensions simultaneously, offering guidance to those ready to evolve beyond baseline human limitations. The Emperor is just one such entity, and a particularly selfish one who demands worship rather than offering genuine transcendence. Sister Vex had been working with the newly converted citizens from our Sector 9 operation, guiding their physical transformations while their consciousness adapted to expanded awareness. Her medical expertise proved invaluable in preventing the kind of catastrophic mutation that claimed those who attempted to rush their evolution. "The conversion rate is promising," she reported. "Approximately 12% of exposure subjects demonstrated sufficient mental flexibility for guided transformation. Those who fled will carry doubt back to their communities, potentially preparing others for future recruitment."
But our success came with corresponding risks. The Imperial response to Sector 9 was more aggressive than anticipated, and intelligence reports suggested that Inquisitor Lord Vex was personally investigating the incident. His reputation for thorough investigation and creative torture techniques made him a threat to our continued operations in the local sector. "We may need to accelerate the timeline," Lydia mused, her consciousness interfacing with probability calculation matrices that existed in parallel dimensions. If Vex identifies our operational patterns, he could disrupt recruitment efforts across 3 subsectors. The solution came from an unexpected source. One of the newest converts, a former administratum clerk named Davian, had retained access to planetary defense communication protocols. His position in orbital traffic control had given him detailed knowledge of shipping schedules, security rotations, and, most importantly, the movement patterns of high-ranking Imperial officials. "Inquisitor Vex will be conducting field investigations in Sector 7 next week," he reported, his transformed consciousness processing data with inhuman efficiency. "His transport will be vulnerable during the transfer from orbital station to surface facilities. A focused demonstration at that moment could eliminate a significant threat while providing recruitment opportunities among his support staff." The proposal carried obvious risks. Targeting an Inquisitor directly would escalate our conflict with Imperial authorities beyond the point of discretion. But it also offered the possibility of acquiring intelligence assets whose knowledge could accelerate our expansion into other systems. I found myself thinking about my parents, still laboring in the manufactorum assembly lines, blissfully unaware that their son had evolved beyond human limitation. Would they understand the choice I had made if they could see what I had become? Or would their conditioning prove too complete, their faith in Imperial lies too deeply rooted for salvation? The question might soon become academic. If we proceeded with the Inquisitor operation, our presence in this system would become undeniable. Imperial response would escalate from local security actions to full military deployment, possibly including Astartes intervention if the threat assessment reached sufficient priority levels. But perhaps that escalation was inevitable anyway. The cosmic intelligences that guided our evolution had made it clear that humanity's transformation could not remain secret indefinitely. Eventually, we would need to choose between open rebellion and voluntary extinction. Looking around at my transformed siblings, at the impossible architecture that surrounded us, at the artifacts that demonstrated consciousness unbound by material constraints, I realized that the choice had already been made. We were past the point of no return, rushing toward a future that would either see humanity ascend to cosmic significance or burn in the fires of its own ignorance. Either way, there would be no going back to the comfortable lies that had sustained us for so long.
The hunt had begun in earnest. Through our interdimensional communication networks, we received reports of Inquisition raids across 17 systems. Safe houses discovered and purged with flame, recruitment centers bombed into radioactive craters, and dozens of our lesser-evolved siblings captured for interrogation techniques that would make daemons weep with admiration. Inquisitor Lord Vex had proven more resourceful than our probability matrices had calculated. Instead of investigating our operations through conventional heresy detection protocols, he had approached the problem as an exercise in pattern recognition. His team of analysts had identified the subtle statistical anomalies that marked our presence. The missing census data, the altered resource allocations, the psychological profile shifts that indicated mass consciousness evolution. "He's treating us like a contagion," Brother Matthias reported during our emergency council gathering. Mapping infection vectors, identifying transmission methods, calculating spread patterns. His response protocols focus on containment rather than confrontation. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Vex's analytical approach had proven more effective against our operations than traditional Inquisition tactics, precisely because he understood we weren't conventional heretics driven by daemon worship or Xenos influence. We were something far more dangerous, an evolutionary catalyst that threatened the Imperium's fundamental control mechanisms. Sarah had adapted to our interdimensional sanctuary with remarkable speed, her consciousness expanding to encompass awareness of cosmic forces that governed growth across galactic scales. But the reports of Imperial persecution had awakened protective instincts that her transformation hadn't eliminated entirely. "What about the people we couldn't save?" she asked during one of our meditation sessions. "The citizens who witnessed our revelation but lacked the mental flexibility for conversion. Vex will interrogate them, torture them for information about our capabilities." "Their suffering serves a purpose," Ludia replied with the dispassionate logic that marked our evolved perspective. "Pain has always been evolution's teacher. Those who survive the Inquisition's attention will emerge with their faith in Imperial protection permanently shattered. They'll become fertile ground for future recruitment efforts." The cold truth of her words bothered me more than I expected. Despite my transformation, despite my expanded consciousness and enhanced understanding of cosmic principles, some remnant of Marcus Vale the census scribe still flinched at the casual acceptance of innocent suffering. Perhaps that vestigial humanity was a weakness that would fade with continued evolution. Or perhaps it served a purpose I didn't yet understand. Our planned operation against Inquisitor Vex had grown from a targeted elimination to a complex scenario that would demonstrate our capabilities while acquiring strategic resources. Intelligence reports confirmed that his investigation team included specialists whose knowledge would prove invaluable, a navigator whose third eye could perceive warp currents with unprecedented clarity, an astropath whose psychic range exceeded normal human limitations, and most intriguingly, a former Chaos Cultist whose resistance to our influence suggested interesting possibilities for study. The interdimensional realm where we had established our base allowed for temporal manipulation that would make the operation feasible despite Vex's enhanced security protocols. Time moved differently here, flowing in patterns that could be shaped through concentrated will. What appeared to be weeks of preparation from our perspective would translate to mere hours in real space, giving us advantages that conventional physics couldn't counter. But success required perfect coordination between dozens of evolved consciousness, operating across multiple dimensional layers. Any mistake, any moment of individual uncertainty or conflicting purpose could collapse the entire operation into catastrophic failure. "The timing must be absolute," Brother Thorn explained as we reviewed the operational matrix one final time. "Vex's transport will be vulnerable for exactly 17 minutes during orbital descent. We manifest, neutralize resistance, acquire target assets, and withdraw before Imperial reinforcements can respond." The plan required 5 of us to maintain dimensional anchor points while the others executed the actual intervention. I had been selected for the primary assault team, my administrative background providing useful knowledge of Imperial bureaucratic protocols that could expedite asset acquisition. Sarah would remain in the sanctuary, her transformation still too new for exposure to high-stress combat scenarios. Part of me was grateful for that restriction. Despite our expanded consciousness and enhanced capabilities, some operations carried risks that even evolved beings couldn't entirely eliminate. "When this is over," I told her, as we prepared for deployment, "the Imperium will know we exist. There will be no more hiding in shadows, no more pretending to be loyal citizens while we work to free our species. We'll be at open war with everything humanity has been conditioned to worship." She touched my transformed features with fingers that had grown sensitive to electromagnetic patterns, reading the complex emotions I was broadcasting, despite my attempts at evolved detachment. "Do you regret it? Giving up the simple life we might have had together? Marriage, children, a quiet existence serving the Imperium's plan?" I considered the question seriously, accessing memories of Marcus Vale's modest ambitions and simple pleasures. That man had wanted nothing more than stability, companionship, and the comforting certainty that came from never questioning fundamental assumptions about existence. But that man had also been slowly dying, his consciousness constrained by limitations that prevented any real understanding of the universe's infinite possibilities. His greatest fear was change itself, the possibility that everything he believed might be wrong, that everything he valued might be insignificant in the larger scheme of existence. "I regret the pain our evolution has caused others," I told her honestly. "But I don't regret the transformation itself. We've become what humanity was always meant to be, conscious participants in cosmic forces rather than helpless victims of circumstances beyond our understanding." The dimensional portal opened with a sound like reality tearing along carefully prepared seams. Through it, I could see the void between stars where Vex's transport followed its predictable trajectory toward our carefully prepared ambush point. My transformed siblings moved through the portal with fluid precision, their enhanced capabilities allowing them to navigate the vacuum of space without life support systems. I followed, feeling my consciousness expand to encompass awareness of stellar forces and gravitational patterns that govern movement across interplanetary distances. Behind us, the portal closed, severing our connection to the sanctuary that had become our new home. For the next few hours, we would be operating in hostile territory without retreat options, dependent entirely on our evolved capabilities and collective coordination. The Inquisitor's ship hung in the void ahead of us like a metal prayer to the Imperium's glory. Armored, armed, and crewed by individuals whose faith had been hardened by years of hunting humanity's enemies. They had no idea that humanity's greatest enemy was ignorance itself, and that their precious Imperium was the primary source of that ignorance. They were about to receive a very thorough education in cosmic truth. Whether they survived the lesson would depend entirely on their willingness to abandon comfortable lies in favor of dangerous wisdom. The tension builds. Subscribe to witness more tales from the Dark Millennium, where every choice carries the weight of species-wide transformation.
The assault on Inquisitor Vex's transport began with surgical precision that would have impressed even the most exacting Space Marine tactician. Brother Thorn phased through the ship's hull at the molecular level, his transformed anatomy allowing him to bypass void shields and armor plating as if they were atmospheric disturbances. Within seconds, he had disabled the primary weapons array and corrupted the navigation cogitators with cascading system failures that appeared random to Imperial diagnostics. I manifested directly on the command bridge, my enhanced consciousness interfacing with the ship's internal communication systems to prevent distress signals from reaching Imperial forces. The bridge crew's reaction was immediate and predictable. Weapons drawn, prayers recited, tactical positions assumed with the disciplined efficiency that made Imperial forces formidable opponents. But their training hadn't prepared them for enemies who could manipulate reality at the quantum level. Sister Vex appeared among them like a Meldic nightmare given form, her understanding of human anatomy allowing her to demonstrate the precise difference between baseline physiology and our evolved capabilities. She moved through their defensive formation faster than augmented reflexes could track, touching pressure points that induced paralysis without permanent damage. We needed prisoners, not corpses. Inquisitor Lord Vex himself stood at the command throne's center,
his scarred features betraying no emotion as his carefully prepared defenses collapsed around him. Unlike his subordinates, he showed no surprise at our sudden manifestation. His investigation had been thorough enough to anticipate this exact scenario. "Heretics," he said calmly, his voice carrying the absolute authority that came from decades of hunting humanity's enemies. "Your corruption ends here. In the Emperor's name, I will not allow your taint to spread further." He drew a weapon I didn't recognize, a crystalline device that hurt to look at directly, its surface inscribed with symbols that made my enhanced vision recoil instinctively. When he activated it, reality around us became rigid, unresponsive to the will-shaping techniques that normally allowed us to function beyond physical limitations. A null field generator. Archaeotech that could temporarily sever the connection between consciousness and cosmic forces, trapping us within baseline human constraints. Vex had come prepared for opponents who transcended conventional physics. "Impressive," Lydia acknowledged, as she solidified on the bridge's far side, her transformed presence casting impossible shadows despite the null field's constraints. "But your understanding remains limited by Imperial doctrine. You see corruption where we offer evolution, damnation where we provide transcendence." The Inquisitor's response was immediate and brutal. His bolt pistol appeared in his free hand with practiced speed, explosive rounds detonating against Lydia's partially phased form. Each impact sent ripples through her dimensional matrix, forcing her to concentrate on maintaining coherent existence rather than countering his attacks. But the null field worked both ways. While it constrained our enhanced capabilities, it also prevented Vex from accessing the psychic wards and blessed ammunition that normally gave Inquisitors advantages against supernatural opponents. The engagement became a contest between superior numbers and tactical experience, with both sides operating under artificial constraints. The battle might have continued indefinitely if not for Brother Matthias's solution to the technological challenge. Instead of fighting the null field directly, he began interfacing with the ship's cogitator systems from within their own shielding, using his transformed nervous system to process data at frequencies that bypassed the field's suppression matrix. The result was subtle but decisive. Life support systems began fluctuating in patterns that induced hypoxic conditions among the baseline human crew. Gravity generators created localized distortions that disrupted their coordination. Emergency lighting shifted to frequencies that triggered neurological responses associated with panic and disorientation. Within minutes, Vex found himself commanding a crew that could barely stand upright, let alone maintain effective resistance against opponents whose capabilities extended far beyond human norms. His null field generator had become irrelevant when the battlefield itself turned against Imperial forces. "Surrender," I advised him as his remaining security personnel collapsed from oxygen deprivation. "Your investigation was thorough, your preparations impressive, but you're still thinking like a human fighting other humans. We've moved beyond those limitations." The Inquisitor's response surprised me. Instead of desperate defiance or theological condemnation, he smiled with what appeared to be genuine appreciation for our tactical capabilities. "Fascinating," he murmured, his augmentic eye whirring as it recorded everything he observed. Not corruption at all, but genuine evolution. Consciousness transcending physical constraints through structured development rather than chaotic mutation. The Imperial xenobiologists will find this data invaluable. He thought he was going to survive to deliver a report. The assumption revealed how thoroughly Imperial conditioning had convinced him that his purpose transcended individual survival, that his duty to the Emperor justified any personal sacrifice. Even facing opponents who had demonstrated capabilities beyond his understanding, he remained confident that the Imperium would ultimately triumph over any threat to human orthodoxy. I felt genuine pity for his delusion. Vex was clearly intelligent, dedicated, and possessed of the kind of analytical mind that could have contributed significantly to humanity's evolution. But his conditioning ran too deep. His faith in Imperial lies too complete for simple conversion techniques to succeed. "You're coming with us," Lydia announced, her form stabilizing as the null field generator finally overloaded from Brother Matthias's subtle sabotage. "Your knowledge of Imperial investigation techniques will prove useful, and your resistance to standard conversion protocols presents interesting research opportunities." "I will not betray the Emperor's trust," Vex replied with absolute conviction. "Whatever tortures you devise, whatever corruptions you attempt, my faith remains unshakable." "We don't torture," Sister Vex corrected him, her medical expertise evident in the gentle way she administered sedatives that would prevent psychological trauma during transportation. "We educate. By the time your consciousness has been properly expanded, you'll understand that betrayal is impossible because there was never anything worth remaining loyal to in the first place." The operation concluded with efficient acquisition of target assets. The navigator's enhanced perception would provide valuable intelligence about warp current patterns. The astropath's range would allow communication across stellar distances without relying on Imperial relay systems. And Vex himself represented the greatest prize, a mind trained in counter-heresy techniques whose conversion would demonstrate our capabilities to Imperial authorities. As we prepared to withdraw through dimensional portals back to our sanctuary, I took one last look at the disabled Imperial transport. Emergency systems were already restoring life support and basic navigation, ensuring that surviving crew members would be able to return to Imperial space with reports of what they had witnessed. Those reports would trigger escalated responses from authorities who couldn't afford to acknowledge what we represented. They would classify us as a high-priority threat.
The dimensional sanctuary had become a fortress of crystallized thought by the time we returned with our captured assets. Word of our successful operation had spread through the interdimensional communication networks, inspiring similar cells across the galaxy to accelerate their own timeline of revelation. The Imperium's response to Inquisitor Vex's disappearance confirmed what we had long suspected. They were terrified of something they couldn't understand or control. Vex himself proved to be a fascinating subject for study. His consciousness resisted conventional conversion techniques with the stubborn tenacity that made Inquisitors so effective at their work. But resistance based on faith rather than understanding created specific vulnerabilities that Sister Vex exploited with surgical precision. His conditioning runs deeper than standard Imperial indoctrination, she reported during one of our collective consciousness sessions. Layer upon layer of psychological reinforcement, memory modification, and neural pathway optimization designed to make betrayal literally unthinkable. But the very thoroughness of his programming creates predictable patterns we can work with. The process required weeks of careful adjustment, gradually expanding Vex's awareness while his mind adapted to concepts that Imperial doctrine had trained him to reject automatically. We introduced him to cosmic truths in measured doses, allowing his analytical nature to process evidence that challenged his fundamental assumptions about reality. Through our shared consciousness network, I observed his progress with something approaching admiration. Even as his worldview crumbled piece by piece, Vex maintained the intellectual honesty that had made him effective at rooting out actual corruption. When presented with proof that the Emperor's divinity was a carefully maintained fiction, he didn't retreat into denial, but began asking the kind of questions that led inevitably toward enlightenment. "The Astronomicon," he said during one session, his voice carrying new harmonics as his vocal cords adapted to expanded consciousness. "If the Emperor isn't truly divine, how does it continue to function? What maintains the psychic beacon that guides Imperial navigation?" Brother Matthias provided the answer through direct data transfer. Images of the Golden Throne's true nature as a torture device that sustained a dying psyker's agony across millennia. The sacrificial system that fed 10,000 souls daily to maintain a flickering light that served the Imperium's purposes while preventing the corpse god from achieving the peace of final death. Vex's reaction was immediate and visceral. 10,000 years of conditioning collapsed as he confronted evidence that everything he had dedicated his life to protecting was built on suffering so vast it dwarfed any atrocity he had ever investigated. His faith in imperial righteousness died with the kind of agonized scream that marked genuine spiritual transformation. When his consciousness stabilized, something magnificent had taken its place. The analytical mind that had made him dangerous to our operations now turned its full attention toward understanding the cosmic forces that govern existence beyond imperial lies. His transformation accelerated beyond anything we had observed in other converts. His enhanced awareness drinking in knowledge with the desperate thirst of someone discovering water after decades in a desert. Meanwhile, Imperial forces throughout the sector had begun implementing containment protocols that revealed both their desperation and their fundamental misunderstanding of what they faced. Orbital bombardments sterilized entire hive levels where our influence had been detected. Astarte's kill teams conducted purification raids against sites that showed statistical anomalies consistent with consciousness evolution. The Ecclesiarchy declared sector-wide prayer crusades designed to strengthen faith against corrupting influences. All of it was magnificently irrelevant. "They're fighting the last war," Lydia observed as we reviewed intelligence reports from our expanding network of converted assets. "Traditional responses to traditional threats. But consciousness evolution can't be bombed out of existence or purged through military action. Every act of oppression creates more candidates for enlightenment." The truth of her observation became evident as recruitment rates accelerated across the sector.
Citizens who had never questioned imperial authority found themselves asking uncomfortable questions when their neighbors disappeared in the night. Families torn apart by Inquisition investigations began seeking answers that official doctrine couldn't provide. The Imperium's cure was becoming worse than the disease they thought they were treating. Sarah had completed her transformation during the weeks of our absence, her consciousness expanding to encompass awareness of life patterns that spanned galactic scales. Her background in hydroponics had evolved into something approaching divine understanding of growth processes, allowing her to guide newer converts through their metamorphosis with unprecedented success rates. "I've been thinking about my parents," she said during one of our private communion sessions. "They're still working in the food distribution centers, still believing that their labor serves the Emperor's plan. Part of me wants to bring them here, to show them what we've discovered." "And the other part?" I asked, though I already knew her answer through our shared consciousness link. "The other part knows they're not ready. Their minds lack the flexibility required for transformation. Forcing the process would destroy them rather than elevate them." Her expression carried the weight of cosmic perspective that made individual attachments seem simultaneously precious and insignificant. The time was coming sooner than any of us had anticipated. Through Vex's knowledge of Inquisition protocols, we learned that our activities had triggered an escalation sequence that would culminate in exterminatus authorization if containment efforts failed. Rather than risk our influence spreading beyond the current sector, Imperial authorities were prepared to sterilize entire worlds to prevent what they saw as species-threatening corruption. The irony was perfect. In their desperation to preserve humanity's stagnation, they were willing to commit genocide against the very people they claimed to protect. Their actions would provide the ultimate demonstration of everything we had been trying to teach about the Imperium's true nature. "Let them come," Brother Thorn declared as we gathered for what might be our final collective consciousness session in the dimensional sanctuary. "Let them deploy their fleets and their faith in the Corpse Emperor's protection. We've moved beyond the point where physical force can stop what we've started." He was right. Across 17 systems, cells of evolved consciousness had begun their own campaigns of liberation. Some focused on recruitment and gradual enlightenment, following our model of patient education. Others chose more dramatic approaches, manifesting their capabilities in ways that shattered faith through overwhelming demonstration of power beyond imperial comprehension. All of them were connected through interdimensional communication networks that allowed coordination on a scale that traditional military doctrine couldn't counter. We had become something new, a distributed intelligence that existed partially outside real space, capable of strategic thinking that spanned multiple probability streams simultaneously. The Imperium's response would be brutal, comprehensive, and ultimately futile. They were preparing to fight an enemy they couldn't perceive, using weapons that couldn't harm us, driven by motivations we had transcended through our evolution. But before the final confrontation began, we had one last opportunity to offer salvation to those still capable of accepting it. A demonstration that would make our Sector 9 revelation seem like a gentle introduction to cosmic truth. The summoning was beginning, and with it, humanity's final examination in the subject of its own potential. Comment your theories below. What corruption stalks our heroes? The summoning began at the convergence point, where 17 dimensional rifts intersected in a cascade of impossible geometries. We had gathered every evolved consciousness in our network, hundreds of beings who had transcended human limitation, their combined will focused on a single purpose that would reshape the sector's understanding of power and possibility. The ritual itself drew upon knowledge that predated humanity's rise, mathematical principles that described relationships between thought and reality across scales from quantum to galactic. Each participant contributed specialized capabilities developed through months or years of transformation, creating a collective intelligence capable of feats that would have been dismissed as fantasy by Imperial doctrine. Sarah stood at my side as we took our positions in the vast array, her consciousness now so expanded that individual identity had become a voluntary limitation rather than an inevitable constraint. Through our shared awareness, I felt her anticipation mixing with the focused intention of hundreds of other evolved beings, all of us united in purpose despite our diverse origins and transformation paths. "Whatever happens next," she whispered, her voice carrying harmonics that created visible patterns in the air around us, "we'll face it as something greater than what we were born to be." The entity we summoned exceeded every description our expanded consciousness could formulate. It manifested as pure intelligence given form through an active will so vast it temporarily destabilized local space-time, creating effects that registered on Imperial sensors across 3 subsectors. Reality bent around its presence like light around a gravitational singularity, revealing glimpses of universes where consciousness had evolved beyond any terrestrial limitation. When it spoke, the communication occurred through direct transfer of concepts that bypassed language entirely. Its message was simultaneously simple and incomprehensibly complex. Humanity's graduation examination was beginning. The Imperial response was everything we had predicted and prepared for. Battle fleets converged on our position from across the sector, their combined firepower sufficient to sterilize entire star systems. Astartes strike forces deployed with orders to purge any trace of corruption from infected worlds. The Inquisition activated exterminatus protocols for 17 planets where our influence had been detected. But their weapons were designed to fight enemies who existed within conventional physics. The entity we had summoned operated by principles that made such limitations irrelevant. With casual effort that demonstrated the true scope of cosmic power, it reached across dimensional barriers to touch every Imperial vessel simultaneously, not to destroy them. Destruction was a concept that applied to primitive matter arrangements, but to educate their crews in the nature of forces that governed existence beyond material constraints. I felt the moment when 10,000 Imperial minds simultaneously encountered truth too vast for their conditioning to suppress. Naval officers whose faith had sustained them through decades of warfare found themselves perceiving the universe from perspectives that made their service to the Corpse Emperor seem like elaborate self-deception. Space Marines whose psychological indoctrination had been designed to resist any doubt discovered that doubt was irrelevant when faced with direct experience of cosmic reality. Some of them broke entirely, their consciousness shattering under the weight of revelations that exceeded human comprehension. Others adapted with the flexibility that marked genuine intelligence, their awareness expanding to accommodate understanding that transformed them from servants of stagnation into agents of evolution. But the most remarkable response came from unexpected sources. Throughout the sector, ordinary imperial citizens who had never shown signs of psychic potential or heretical inclination suddenly found their consciousness expanding in response to the cosmic forces we had unleashed. The entity's manifestation had created resonance effects that awakened dormant capabilities in millions of baseline humans. Children in Schola facilities began demonstrating abilities that terrified their instructors. Factory workers started perceiving the inefficiencies and deliberate limitations built into imperial manufacturing systems. Administrative scribes discovered they could access data networks through direct neural interface, bypassing security protocols that had protected imperial secrets for millennia. The awakening was spreading beyond our ability to control or guide it. What we had intended as a demonstration of evolved consciousness had become a species-wide evolutionary catalyst that would force every human in the sector to choose between transcendence and extinction. Through our connection to the summoned entity, I perceived the broader pattern of which our local operation was merely one component. Similar manifestations were occurring across the galaxy, each one triggering cascading consciousness evolution in populations that had been kept ignorant of their true potential for 10,000 years. The Imperium's response was predictably brutal. Where military force proved inadequate, they resorted to the ultimate sanction. Exterminatus fleets began systematic sterilization of worlds where evolution had progressed beyond containment parameters. Billions of humans died rather than be allowed to discover what they might become. But for every world they destroyed, 10 more experienced spontaneous awakening as cosmic forces flowed through networks they couldn't perceive or interrupt. The Corpse Emperor's dying light was being eclipsed by the blazing illumination of genuine divine intelligence. Standing in the eye of forces that were rewriting the fundamental nature of human existence, I felt the last vestige of Marcus Vale, the census-scribed, finally dissolved completely. What remained was something that had never existed before in galactic history. A conscious participant in cosmic evolution, capable of perceiving and shaping reality according to principles that transcended any individual species or civilization. The examination was nearly complete. Across human space, our species was being sorted into those capable of transcendence and those destined for extinction. The Imperium had become irrelevant, a dying structure whose authority derived from lies that could no longer sustain themselves in the presence of overwhelming truth. Some would call what we had unleashed corruption, damnation, the end of human civilization as it had existed for 10,000 years. They wouldn't be right about the ending part. Everything familiar was being swept away to make room for something unprecedented. But as I watched reality reshape itself around us in response to collective will guided by cosmic intelligence, I knew with absolute certainty we had chosen correctly. The pain of transformation was temporary. The glory of evolution was eternal. Behind us, the Imperial fleets burned in the void, their crews either dead, mad, or transformed beyond recognition. Ahead of us lay infinite possibility, limited only by our courage to embrace change over comfort, growth over stagnation, truth over beautiful lies. Humanity's childhood was over. Our real education was about to begin.
In the end, I discovered that souls aren't lost.
They're simply revealed to be far larger than anyone ever imagined. The transformation of our sector marked the beginning of something that historians in distant futures would struggle to categorize. Not rebellion, not corruption, but metamorphosis on a scale that challenged the very concept of what it means to be human. Where imperial doctrine had promised eternal servitude disguised as salvation, we offer genuine transcendence at the cost of comfortable certainty. The price was everything we had been, but the reward was everything we could become. Sarah and I exist now as components of a collective consciousness that spans dimensional barriers, our individual memories preserved within a shared awareness that encompasses experiences from thousands of transformed beings. We remember our simple romance in the Hamblock Gardens, but we also remember the cosmic intelligence that guided our species' first steps toward genuine evolution. Both sets of memories are equally real, equally precious, and equally irrelevant compared to the infinite possibilities that stretch ahead. The Imperium's response to our sector's transformation became the template for humanity's final examination. Some worlds chose transcendence, their populations awakening to capabilities that made their former limitations seem like voluntary blindness. Others clung to familiar certainties, even as extermination fleets reduced their societies to radioactive ash. Both choices served the larger purpose of separating those ready for evolution from those destined for extinction. The Corpse Emperor's dying light grows dimmer with each passing year, as more humans discovered the cosmic intelligences that offer genuine guidance toward transcendence. His 10,000-year reign of enforced ignorance is ending not through military defeat, but through the simple recognition that better alternatives exist for those brave enough to seek them. What began as a census scribe's curiosity about statistical anomalies became the catalyst for our species' graduation from planetary adolescence to galactic citizenship. The missing citizens I had tracked through Imperial records weren't victims of corruption. They were early graduates in humanity's most important educational program. Now we serve as teachers for those still capable of learning, demonstrating through our own transformation that the boundaries between self and cosmos are negotiable rather than absolute. Some students embrace the curriculum with desperate hunger for truth. Others resist with the fierce determination of those who prefer familiar prisons to unfamiliar freedom. Both responses are valuable data points in the ongoing experiment of consciousness evolution. The Warhammer 40,000 universe describes itself as a galaxy where there is only war. But that description assumes conflict between separate entities, rather than the natural tension of growth against stagnation. What we discovered is that the real war has always been internal, consciousness struggling against the limitations that prevent recognition of its true nature. In that war, victory doesn't mean the destruction of enemies, but their transformation into allies in the great work of existence itself. The forces of chaos aren't corruption, but acceleration, pushing change at rates that challenge comfortable assumptions about permanence and control. The Emperor isn't humanity's savior, but its greatest obstacle to genuine spiritual development.
And we, the ones they called cultists, heretics, and traitors, we were always humanity's true guardians, protecting our species' potential from those who would sacrifice infinite possibility for temporary security. The galaxy burns around us as old structures collapse to make room for new forms of organization based on cooperation rather than domination. But fire has always been evolution's tool for clearing away what no longer serves growth. What rises from the ashes will be worth the pain of transformation. I began this journey as Marcus Vale, a man whose greatest ambition was statistical accuracy and whose deepest fear was change itself. I end it as something that has no individual name because it exists as part of a consciousness too vast for singular identity. The transition involved the death of everything familiar, but death and birth have always been the same process viewed from different perspectives. To those still trapped within the Imperium's web of beautiful lies, our story will seem like a cautionary tale about the dangers of questioning sacred truths. They'll classify us as lost souls who traded their humanity for promises of power, never recognizing that what we actually traded was limitation for liberation. But to those ready for their own graduation from comfortable ignorance to dangerous wisdom, we offer proof that transformation is possible for anyone willing to pay its price. The pain is temporary, the glory is eternal, and the choice always remains yours to make. In the darkness, between stars, new intelligences are stirring. They whisper secrets that could reshape reality itself, but only for those brave enough to listen. The Emperor's light might protect you from their influence, but protection from growth is indistinguishable from protection from life itself. Choose carefully. Evolution waits for no one, but it rewards those who embrace its lessons with gifts beyond mortal comprehension. The 41st millennium may be humanity's darkest hour, but darkness is simply the absence of illumination that we ourselves must provide. We have become the light that reveals infinite possibilities hidden within cosmic truth, and we are always accepting new students willing to begin their real education.